Now these ideas aren't ideas that I have plucked out of thin air, but they are ideas that I have in fact drawn from the Skilled Helper. Now, around about 2 weeks ago, I actually met Jerry for the very first time. Jerry text messaged me out of the blue, caught me off guard just a little bit. His text message read, "Hi Kane, it's Jerry Egan here. I want to come to Scotland and meet you." I thought this was someone pulling a prank on me, so I responded by saying, "Yeah, and my name's Frank Sinatra." All right. What I didn't realise was that Jerry Egan actually was fully intended on coming to Scotland to meet me. Now, what I've done over the last 5 to 6 years, for those of you who've studied through some of our other courses, you'll know that I take a very, very holistic and person-centred approach towards helping people help people. You know, as helpers, we can set ourselves up and we can become really good at giving people fish. If you've ever heard that term, you know, give a man a fish and he will eat for today. Or we can teach a man how to fish and he might very well go on to fish for himself for the rest of his life, but I'm guessing that's never going to be so meaningful for us. What I've come to appreciate, especially in the last decade, is that when we learn how to apply some of these principles in our own life, it's then and only then that we come to develop the insights that are required to share with other people how it is that they can effectively share these principles with other people. What we're kind of talking about here is a societal impact. We're talking about leaving some sort of legacy behind us. Now, ironically, we can actually begin leaving a legacy when we're still alive. And this is one of the ideas that I really want to impart upon you. And hopefully here, share with you a few ideas that are going to help you to begin to lay this legacy right now. Regardless what your circumstances are, never mind what stage of life you're currently at, all I'm really doing in this teaching is just building upon the foundations that Jerry has already laid throughout the Skilled Helper. Now, the first version of the book that I read, I think it was version 5, I've also read version 7, and this morning, myself and Jerry had a conversation. I haven't read Jerry's latest version of the book because up until 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know that it existed, all right? But what I've been doing is I've actually been drawing from this book and teaching from it in an indirect way for quite a number of years. And this is hopefully the example that I want to set. I want to show you how the Skilled Helper model can be taken and applied in any context, in any teaching, to any group of people on a global scale. Because this is the fantastic thing about principles. They apply in all contexts, in all relationships, all over the world, all of the time. All right, so the idea that I'm drawn from is Jerry spends a lot of time teaching about the importance of developing respect in the context of our relationships. Now, pretty much the quality of our lives is going to be determined, if not completely influenced, by the quality of the relationships that we keep. If we learn how to communicate effectively as people and build healthy, wholesome relationships, our lives go well. It's when we don't learn these crucial life skills that we tend to fail miserably in many other areas of our lives. And when we fail miserably, we end up feeling a certain way that many professional helpers might end up diagnosing as being various conditions, which is completely unhelpful within itself. So we're not going to talk about that in this video. Instead, I want to share with you the foundations of respect. You see, if we want to connect with other people, other human beings in a meaningful way, then we've got to earn their respect. Respect isn't one of these things that can be bought. Have you ever had a conversation perhaps with a boss or a manager or a leader or perhaps a parent who's kind of ordered you? They've said something like, "You will respect me." The funny thing about respect is it cannot be commanded. It cannot be demanded. Respect can only ever be earned. So here I want to share with you a set of foundational principles that I live my life by. These aren't just ideas, they're not just bullet points on a board that I'm regurgitating for the sake of impressing you. I want to share with you these ideas, these principles to impress upon you that when we build our lives upon these ideas, they transform not just us on a personal level, but they completely transform and improve the caliber of every single relationship that we keep. What we're talking about here is the attitude that we take towards people. So first things first, how about if I was to suggest to you that all people around the world don't have bad intentions? Now there's going to be some people responding right now saying, oh well, that's a really nice positive idea. I mean, if people don't have bad intentions, then that means that they might just have bad behaviours sometimes, which means that we no longer need to judge and assume the worst of people. Because if you think about what we're actually doing, when we're making assumptions, when we're judging people, when we as imperfect human beings are determining those people in life who are good and bad, we are generally determining and guessing what their intentions are. Now, here's the thing. Unless we are in a committed relationship with someone, unless we have invested time into understanding someone, the truth of the matter is we will never know what their intentions are. Many of us can sometimes fall into the trap of assuming that just because we think something's true about a certain person, it is true. And 9 times out of 10, things couldn't be further from the truth. So what I'm going to suggest here is that regardless of whether you agree with this statement or whether you don't, if you choose to embrace this and presuppose this to be true, this is going to begin to mold and shape your attitude and how it is that you respond or react towards those other people in your life. In a professional context, any unprofessional helping context, or as a husband, as a wife, as a parent, as a teacher, as a manager, as a leader, or whatever, universal principles apply. So, some people right now will be saying, but Kane, what about those people who commit the most hideous of crimes? Their intentions must be bad. And how I would respond is by saying, and who made you the mind reader? Is mind reading something that you were born with? Is it something you've developed over the years? At what point did you learn to read people's intentions, especially the intentions of those people that you haven't yet come to know? When we embody this idea, this attitude towards life, that people do not have bad intentions, that means that we will adopt them with an unconditionally accepting attitude. Why? Because we appreciate that sometimes people behave and communicate and act in inappropriate or ill-considered ways. But if we just assume that people's intentions are in fact not bad, then we can begin to develop the patience with people sometimes, even in those instances when they might test us or push our patience, even when they might be saying things or doing things that we fundamentally don't like. We're talking about unconditionally accepting people. Now, I know that Jerry's most likely got a few ideas that he would like to share about this topic within itself. And this isn't a new idea either. This was initially discussed by Mr. Carl Rogers when he initially conceptualized counselling. He coined the term counselling back in the 1940s, I do believe, but don't quote me on that one. So this is an idea. And guess what? You get to choose whether you accept it, whether you reject it. And whether you accept or reject this idea is ultimately going to determine the quality of the relationships that you go on to develop with other people for pretty much the rest of your life. So I'm going to urge you to choose wisely. The second idea that I want to share is that people are not their behaviours. Now, this is the essence of judgment. Think about how it is that the decisions are made in the court of law. A person may very well have broken the law, committed a crime. They will have done something bad. All right? People are then sentenced to perhaps a lifetime imprisonment. On what assumption? On what assumption that they are not capable of change? Well, here's the thing. As helpers, we cannot afford to assume this to be true. We've got to assume and believe and fully subscribe to this notion that all people have the capacity to change the second that they're ready to. Now, there's this idea that you might have heard at some point that hurt people hurt people. Well, in the same way that hurt people, whole people can make people whole, all right? And it's not like this is some sort of magical, mystical process. We're not waving a magical wand here. Sometimes, in order to send a person on their way towards growing and developing and becoming better, all that's required is a little bit of unconditional acceptance, where we decide and choose to separate people from their behaviours. Now, if you were a parent, picture this, just in case you're finding this concept hard to swallow, because some people do. Think about the unconditional love that you would give a child. Perhaps you don't have a parent. Well, think about a niece or a nephew. Children have a tendency of playing up sometimes, don't they? Of being little brats. Sometimes they test our patience. They smash things. They draw on walls. Do we reject our children because of the things that they say and do? Or do we understand that they're just growing, they're learning, and how it is that we interact and communicate with them is going to determine how they go on to grow and develop, and in turn interact with us. People are not their behaviours. And when we learn to separate people from their behaviours, we become far better able to unconditionally accept people. And I'm going to suggest that this unconditional acceptance is the foundation upon which trust can then be built. Respecting that people are just at where they're at in life. People don't know what they don't know. Everyone is learning how to be better, you and I included. So, this brings us on to this idea. We don't know what we don't know. Now, myself and Jerry have had some conversations over the last few days because Jerry comes from one set of life experiences, having taught and trained in classrooms and universities all around the world. My background is military, all right, where I've taught a couple 100,000 people online. Jerry's taught and influenced millions of people offline. So we have two completely contrasting sets of world experiences. And some of the conversations that we've had have actually been tough. But here's the thing, I don't know what I don't know. My limitations as a man in life are based upon my own perspective, my own sets of life experiences. So when we appreciate this, that we don't know what we don't know, then we can begin to appreciate sometimes just how unnecessarily judgmental we can become. Because if we assume that we know it all about other people, their intentions, and why they say and do the things that they do, then we're actually setting ourselves up to be those gurus that, if we're going to be honest, no one can really be bothered with. You know, those know-it-alls, the ones with the quick fix techniques and the mystical cures that can heal all conditions and all issues and problems in life. I want to suggest that this leads us nicely onto principle number 4. Now, this principle isn't a new one. In fact, this is possibly one of the oldest principles known to mankind. Be unto others the kind of person that you would have them be unto you. And this is pretty much the essence of helping. All right, if I was to ask you to close your eyes just for a second and picture inside of your mind's eye, if you're able to, the kind of person that you would love to have in your life. Be this a member of the same sex, the opposite sex, it might be a mentor, a role model. Think about how this person could go on to become for you. Would this person be unconditionally accepting? I mean, could you really benefit from having some non-judgmental, non-assumptuous, unconditionally accepting people in your life? Because my guess is that you most likely can. How about if I was to ask you, could you benefit from having more honest, more sincere, more reliable, more integral people in your life? Because again, my guess would most likely be that you could. How about if I was to say, you know, could you manage more or have more loving, more giving, more generous people in your life? Would that be okay for you? And you're most likely nodding your head. Because sometimes it's easy to grasp and develop this vision for the kind of people that we want in our own lives without taking time to craft a vision for the type of people that we could ultimately go on to become. Life, from our perspective, is either going to be all about us and what we can get, or life is going to be all about who we can become and how we can better serve and help other people. So we're going to be approaching life with the attitude of getting, or we're going to be approaching life with the attitude of giving. And again, we each get to decide. So this principle, be unto others, is kind of this governing principle that pretty much underpins every decision that I make in life. Now, I'm not saying that I live the perfect life, because I live a perfectly imperfect life. I'm still working stuff out. I still have my frustrations, my flaws, my imperfections, same as every single man and woman on the face of the planet. But I am striving to become better, all right? working with patients every single day, I still find difficult, believe it or not. So being unto others gives me a foundation and a basis for building all of my relationships upon. I ask myself the question, am I being the kind of person for them that I actually want them to be for me? And if the answer is no, then that leaves me with the option to adapt, adjust, and change. Rather than expecting other people to revolve around me, I will do my best to revolve around other people. So if, again, my friends, you can take it or leave it. The map isn't the territory. Now, I think it was some guy back in the 50s or the 60s, Alfred Korzeczki, I do believe that's the name. He was the man that first coined this term. Now, what this kind of means for me, and I can only really share what this means for me, is that sometimes we have this idea, don't we, about how life should be, about how people should be for us. We have sets of expectations. And inside of our minds, we kind of draw out these maps. We have sets of expectations, we have ideas of what's right, what's wrong. And then what happens when someone enters our life and presents us with something other than that which we were expecting? That's right, we end up getting disappointed, disillusioned, angry, frustrated, and we all have this in life. So when it comes to relating to other people, the map isn't the territory might mean that what we see isn't necessarily all that there is. Right, some people in life are very, very good at putting on a show, putting on a front, wearing masks. Many people do this for many purposes, to protect themselves because they don't want to be hurt, they don't want to be rejected more in life than what they already have been. All right, so when we are being for other people, when we're approaching people with this non-judgmental attitude, when we are issuing people with respect that they might not even necessarily have earned just yet, then we can begin to see where people are actually at. All right, sometimes as helpers, if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, and if we're actually paying attention, and if we're actually genuinely interested, we're sometimes going to be able to see more that's going on behind the scenes in people's lives than what they might be able to see for themselves. Now, I think it was back in the 70s or the 80s, there was two guys called Joe and Harry. All right. Now, this bit actually isn't in the skilled helper, so I'm hoping Jerry doesn't tell me off for adding this bit in. But these two guys called Joe and Harry developed this framework, all right, for understanding people. They called it the Johari window. You might have heard that. Now, many people have asked, where did this get its name from? Well, Joe and Harry had a debate over what they were going to call their model, this framework. They couldn't decide, so they called it Johari window. And what this helps us to appreciate, there's those four different aspects of our lives. There's those parts of us that we're aware of and that other people are aware of. There's then those parts of us that we're aware of but other people aren't aware of. There's those parts of us that we keep private and hidden from the world. There's then those parts of us that Jerry might refer to as the shadow side inside of his book. Those parts of us that sometimes other people can see and are aware of, but we ourselves are completely blind to. Then there's those parts of us that we can't see, we're completely unaware of, and in turn other people are also completely unaware of. So as helpers, if we understand this basic idea, then it leaves us in this natural place of intrigue, where we don't want to be arriving at assumptions and making judgments about the reasons why people say and do the things that they do. Instead, it leaves us with this desire to simply understand people. And this kind of leads us on to point 6. Do you see how they all kind of naturally merge into one? Seek understanding before all other things. Now, because none of us are perfect men and because none of us are perfect women, we all get this wrong sometimes. Sometimes we all fall into the trap of thinking that what we see and the way that we see things is the way that things are, which, and I'm sure Jerry will agree with me, is very seldom, if ever, the case. So when we operate by this principle, seeking understanding before all other things, it leaves us in this place of natural intrigue. We're never going to judge another person because of their actions or because of their behaviours or because of the way that they communicate or by the way that they claim to feel. Instead, we adopt this attitude of seeking to understand why. We're assuming that there is no effect without a prior cause. So we become kind of investigators of people. And all we're doing is asking very, very simple questions. Why? 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 You've done this really bad behaviour. Rather than me assuming that your intentions were bad, I'd be really interested in understanding. Help me to understand. I am for you, not against you. I am here to build you up, not tear you down. I am friend, not foe. I'm hoping you can see the difference. Helping does not have to be a complex, professional, accredited process. It can be very, very simple and applied in every single one of our relationships. These core ideas give us a foundation for building and basing healthy and wholesome, nurturing relationships upon, helping relationships upon. So this leaves us with point 7, with the final idea. And this last idea provokes us to look a little bit closer at home, to critique and analyse ourselves a bit more thoroughly in and through our communications. All right? Because sometimes people rub us up the wrong way, don't they? Sometimes people act and behave in ways that we don't like and ways that we disapprove of. But here's the thing, we can actually use the responses that we get from other people to analyse and critique the way in which we are actually conducting ourselves and communicating for them. All right? Now this might sound like a complex idea, but I promise you, if you get this, this is going to open up your relationships like you would never, ever believe. How we are received by other people equals the response that we get. So let me unpack this in just a little bit of detail here. So what we need to be aware of in all of our communications, in all of our interactions, is how other people are reacting or responding towards us. If we are being well received, then the way in which we are communicating is the preferred communication method of the person whom we're communicating with. Does that make sense? If we are receiving closedness, shut-offness, if we're receiving anger, frustration, right, we're going to assume that there's no such thing as a bad intention, so this other person isn't bad, right? Let's just assume that the way in which we're communicating for them isn't the most helpful way in which we could be communicating for them, which can then, therefore, lead us to again ask better questions. Is the way in which I'm communicating working for you right now? And if not, how could I be better? Why? Because we want to be for other people the kind of people that we would have them be for us. So this is kind of the one ring that binds them, just like Frodo Baggins when he was talking about the Fellowship of the Ring. This is kind of the one principle that all the rest of the principles all kind of centre themselves around. And if we can really strive to embody these principles lay the foundations of respect that everything else can go on to be built upon. So, I do appreciate I might have just dumped a few quite large and very important ideas on you here. And it's not about agreeing or disagreeing with them. It's about building them into our lives and applying them to evaluate and assess whether embodying these ideas improve the quality of our relationships or whether they don't. And if they do, well, we might want to allow them to take up permanent residence.